My name is Dr. Penelope Fairbanks, and on Tuesday, April 15th, I learned exactly how dangerous it is when a man with inherited power mistakes your life's work for a line item on his budget. It began, as most days did, at 6 a.m. The city was still a wash of gray and soft blue outside the windows of my apartment. The air was cool. My first act of the day was to grind the beans for my coffee, Ethiopian yirgachefe. The scent was bright, citrusy. I drank it black from a plain white ceramic mug. There is a purity in things that do not need additives. By 7:15, my Audi A8 was gliding into my reserved spot in the executive garage, P3, Spot 1. The air down there always smelled of cold concrete and expensive exhaust fumes. My office on the 42nd floor was my sanctuary. It was minimalist, all white surfaces and brushed steel, dominated by a single, magnificent plant, a Paphiopedilum rothschildianum orchid, its petals a symphony of burgundy and cream. It was a difficult plant. It demanded precision, patience, an understanding of its complex systems. We suited each other. I sat in my Herman Miller chair. The leather was cool against my skin. The first thing I did was activate my system, the Fairbanks Protocol. The screen came to life with an interface I had designed myself. It was clean, intuitive, and beneath the surface, more powerful than anything our competitors could dream of. It was not just a database. It was a predictive engine, a global regulatory map, a fortress of compliance I had built over a decade. He had no idea what he was really trying to steal. He thought it was software. It was my mind, codified. That morning, the protocol flagged an anomaly, a potential conflict between a Japanese Ministry of Health requirement and our Phase 2 trial data for a new oncology drug, KP17. A junior analyst would have missed it. A team of lawyers would have debated it for a month. The protocol found it in nanoseconds. I accessed the raw data, cross-referenced it with the ICHE 6 guidelines I knew by heart, and drafted a clarifying addendum. 3 keystrokes sent it to our Tokyo office. A crisis that would have cost us millions and delayed the drug by 6 months was averted before anyone in the C-suite had finished their first croissant. It was not yet 8 a.m. The barbarian arrived at 9. Augustus Kensington. He never walked. He strode, as if daring the floor to challenge his right to be there. His Xenia suits were always a size too tight in the shoulders, a telltale sign of a man who buys for the label, not the fit. He smelled of an aggressive cologne and the faint sweet scent of the vape pen he was always fiddling with. He called a last-minute meeting. The topic, scrawled on the whiteboard, was proactive disruption, a meaningless phrase he'd likely heard at some weekend seminar for the professionally useless. I brought my risk assessment for KP17, 50 pages of meticulous data, charts, and legal precedent. Augustus waved a dismissive hand. He never made eye contact for more than a second. His gaze was always scanning the room for the next person to impress or intimidate. "Penelope," he said, his voice slick with condescension. "This is a 50-page document on what could go wrong. I need a 1-page document on how we're going to make $1 billion. Let's focus on the blue sky, not the storm clouds." The sycophants around the table nodded eagerly. They loved his meaningless aphorisms. They mistook them for vision. I saw them for what they were. The hollow echoes of a man with nothing original to say. The cuts became more frequent after that. He started calling me Penny in the hallways, a diminutive I despised. He'd walk past my office with one of his young, equally useless cronies and ask loudly, "Finished writing your novels, Penny?" A joke about the length and detail of my submissions, the very detail that kept the FDA from shutting us down. Then came the email, or rather, the lack of one. I saw a group of executives heading into the main boardroom for a strategy meeting I should have been leading. I checked my calendar. Nothing. My inbox. Nothing. I was simply excluded. I looked at my reflection in the dark screen of my monitor. My face was a calm, impassive mask, but behind my eyes a switch had been flipped. He was not just ignoring my work, he was trying to erase it. The fortress was being tested from within, and I was its sole architect. The quarterly board presentation was on a Tuesday. The weather was miserable. A cold rain streaked the floor-to-ceiling windows of the main boardroom. The air was thick with the nervous energy of people trying to impress the unimpressible. Augustus was in his element. He paced before the enormous screen like a low-rent televangelist, radiating a confidence completely unmoored from competence. He clicked through slides filled with buzzwords: synergy, leverage, paradigm shift. It was a masterclass in saying nothing with maximum volume. I sat at the long mahogany table, my hands resting on a simple leather folio containing my department's quarterly report, a report he had not asked for and would not acknowledge. Then he arrived at his final slide. "A vision for a dynamic future," it read. He smirked. "Our first step is to streamline our leadership," he announced. He clicked the remote. My professional headshot appeared on the screen. It was 10 feet tall. A thick, brutal red line slashed through it. The room went silent. The only sound was the hum of the projector. "Dr. Fairbanks has been a foundational part of our past," he said, the fake sincerity dripping from every word. "But we need regulatory professionals who understand speed, not just safety. We can't let excessive caution and, frankly, a risk-averse personality cost us billions." I felt the gazes of 20 executives slide toward me, pity, discomfort, fear. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw him pull out his phone. His thumb, adorned with a gaudy signet ring, swiped and tapped. I glanced down at my company ID, clipped to my folio. The small green light, the one that indicated active network access, flickered once and died. He had deactivated my existence in the company from his phone, in front of everyone. A petty, digital execution, a deeply personal act of technological cruelty. I did not react. I did not give him the satisfaction. I stood slowly. My movements were deliberate, precise. I gathered my folio. I did not look at the board members. I looked only at him. My gaze was steady, my expression unreadable. "Your assessment is noted, Mr. Kensington," I said. My voice was calm, icy, and carried across the silent room. "The consequences of this action are now your sole responsibility." I turned and walked out. I did not hurry. Every step was measured. The silence I left behind was a vacuum. It was more powerful than any shouting match could ever be. His smug, triumphant grin was the last thing I saw before the heavy doors swung shut behind me. I did not go home and rage. I went home and calculated. My house is quiet, a place of order, much like my office. But instead of a boardroom, it has a greenhouse. The air inside is warm and humid, smelling of damp earth and blooming things. Surrounded by the patient, complex beauty of my orchids, I think best. I changed out of my charcoal gray Acris suit and into simple linen trousers and a soft cotton shirt. I made coffee, the same Ethiopian yirgacheffe. I sat on a simple wooden stool, a tablet resting on my knees. I did not look for new jobs. I did not call a wrongful termination lawyer. I opened a single file from my personal encrypted drive. My original employment contract from 11 years ago. The company had been desperate to hire me away from a competitor. They had given me almost everything I asked for. My finger scrolled down the digital document. It stopped on a highlighted section. Clause 11-B. It was a clause I wrote myself. My lawyer at the time called it unnecessarily paranoid. It stated that upon termination without documented cause, defined as a pattern of formal written warnings over a 180-day period, the intellectual property rights to the regulatory submission frameworks and methodologies I personally architected and signed would revert to my sole ownership. What he didn't understand was that the Fairbanks Protocol was not just a workflow tool, it was the legally defined framework and methodology. I had built this system with one hidden feature. Every final submission document I ever signed was cryptographically timestamped with my digital signature, creating an unbreakable chain of ownership metadata. He thought he was firing a bureaucrat. He had, in fact, just given away the keys to his entire kingdom. A thin, sharp, dangerous smile touched my lips. My new lawyer, a woman named Anya Sharma, had an office that was as minimalist and efficient as my own. She did not deal in emotion. She dealt in leverage. I explained the situation calmly, factually. I didn't speak of humiliation or cruelty. I spoke of contracts and intellectual property. I slid a sleek, encrypted hard drive across her glass desk. The protocol has logged every submission I personally architected for the last 11 years, 18 approved drugs. The ownership metadata is cryptographically signed and legally unimpeachable. Anya plugged the drive into her laptop. Her eyes scanned the screen. She looked up at me, and her professional mask was replaced by a look of genuine predatory admiration. She smiled. "Dr. Fairbanks?" she said. "This is beautiful. We did not draft a lawsuit. We drafted ownership claims, 19 of them, one for the company and one for each of the 18 global regulatory bodies overseeing their products, from the FDA in America to the EMA in Europe to the PMDA in Japan." The letters were sent by secure courier the next morning. Back at Kensington Pharmaceuticals, Augustus was living his dream. He hired flashy, cheap consultants who promised to disrupt the compliance space. Their first task was to file the new application for KP17. They tried to access the Fairbanks Protocol. I watched remotely through a secure back door I had built for just such a contingency. I saw their failed login attempts. I saw the error messages. Administrator override required P. Fairbanks. I imagined the scene. Augustus, his face turning a blotchy red, slamming his fist on a desk, locked out of the core function of his own company. It was a small, quiet moment of satisfaction, the first of many. The first tremor of the earthquake I had started arrived via a formal letter. The FDA sent a refuse to file notice for the KP17 application. It is a rare and deeply humiliating public rebuke in the pharmaceutical world. It essentially means the paperwork was so sloppy, so incomplete, that they would not even begin to review it. The market, which operates on confidence, got spooked. The stock ticker for Kensington Pharmaceuticals, which had been a steady green, began to bleed red. Then, the letters from Anya Sharma began to land on desks around the world. The company's general counsel, a man named Marcus Thorne, who I had always found competent but spineless, was the first to understand. I imagine him reading Clause 11-B over and over, his face draining of all color. He would have cross-referenced it with the company's bylaws, with intellectual property law, with my personnel file. He would have realized that the $42 billion in annual revenue the company generated came from products whose legal marketing authorizations were no longer owned by the company. They were owned by me. Shipping was frozen. Manufacturing was halted. You cannot sell a drug if you cannot legally attest to the validity of its documentation. The stock did not dip. It plummeted. I watched his world collapse in real time, from the comfort of my greenhouse, sipping my coffee. The summons came via a panicked call from Marcus Thorne to Anya. An emergency late-night board meeting. My presence was not requested. It was begged for. I wore an impeccably tailored suit by the row. The color was a deep, unforgiving black. I walked into the same boardroom where I had been humiliated. The atmosphere was different. The air of smug confidence was gone, replaced by the stench of pure terror. Augustus was at the head of the table, but he was not in command. He was pale, sweating through his silk shirt. He looked like a cornered animal. He tried to bluster. "This is a frivolous, vindictive legal tactic," he stammered, as I took a seat opposite him. I did not respond to him. I nodded to Anya. She plugged a laptop into the room's projector. The first image that appeared on the 10-foot screen was Clause 11-B, its dense legalese highlighted in yellow. The second image was a list of 18 products. Their best sellers: the oncology drug that saved lives, the anti-inflammatory that eased pain for millions. Next to each name was an official FDA approval number. I finally turned my gaze to Augustus. My voice was level, calm, and carried the cold weight of absolute certainty. "For the past 47 days you have been illegally trafficking in misbranded drugs, as you do not hold the marketing authorization. Every box that leaves your warehouse is not just a breach of contract, but a potential federal crime." I let the words hang in the dead air of the room. I watched his face, the look on his face when he realized it was not anger, it was not fear. It was the blank, shattering expression of a man whose entire reality has just been dismantled in front of him. The dawning horror that the game he thought he was playing had rules he never bothered to read. Rules I had written. "You wanted disruption, Mr. Kensington," I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper. "Congratulations." I then turned to the board. "The house is on fire," I told them. "And I am the only one with the water." They fired Augustus that night. The termination was for cause, gross negligence, exposing the company to existential risk. The SEC launched an investigation into him the following week for misleading investors. He was not just fired, he was erased, a cautionary tale for business schools. I did not take my old job back. That would have been a demotion. My new office is on the 55th floor of a newer, better building. The view is spectacular. The company I founded, Fairbanks Regulatory Solutions, occupies the entire floor. My former employer is my first and largest client. The master services agreement I negotiated gives them a license to sell their own products. In return, I received a $200 million upfront payment and a perpetual 20% royalty on net sales. I also have a permanent seat on a new regulatory oversight committee on their board, with absolute veto power. It is morning. Tuesday, September 9th. The sun is bright. On my desk, which is made of a single piece of polished Italian marble, sits a copy of Forbes magazine. My face is on the cover. The headline reads, "The Regulator: How Penelope Fairbanks Turned a Pink Slip into a Pharma Empire." My old Montblanc fountain pen, the one I used to sign every document at my old job, sits in a glass display case like a museum piece. My Paphiopedilum Rothschildianum orchid has pride of place by the window, thriving. I look over the first compliance charter I am drafting for my client. I pick up my new pen, a custom-made Nakaya. Its weight is perfect. I sign my name with a flourish. I take a sip of my coffee. The taste is rich, complex, and deeply satisfying. I did not just get my job back, I took the throne.